If we had known what we were headed into, we probably wouldn't have done it. And then we got into it, and the fear of failing was such a motivator. Ignorance was absolutely bliss.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. SRAM is spoken about in the same breath as the largest cycling companies in the world, but they've also been able to maintain a personality and character that they somehow exude. It's tough to put your finger on exactly what it is, but there's something maybe wholesome about the brand. They're very good marketers, but knowing many people within the company and being mildly exposed to their culture, I was very curious to understand where this comes from and who had created it. SRAM is credited with having 3 co-founders, but Stan Day is the man who planted that seed. And you could very well argue that he is where the brand's culture and values stem from. At least that's what I got out of speaking with him in this episode, while listening to his polite, humble, and understated approach when sharing his story. SRAM all started with Stan taking on a triathlon challenge back in the 80s and thinking, there has to be a better way than this whole down tube shifting method. Twist shift was his answer, and he was able to convince a few of his friends to leave their good jobs, move across the country, and start a business in Chicago and sell their better way. But as successful as the company is now, it certainly didn't start out that way. If it weren't for one pivotal moment, SRAM might be nothing but a side note in our cycling history books.
Grew up in a suburb of Detroit called Grosse Pointe, which is a very nice suburb, and lots of trees, lots of elbow room, that kind of thing. Yeah. And started out in Catholic school, got my knuckles wrapped by the nuns, and moved on to some private schools after that. Boarding school for a while, and then down to Tulane in New Orleans for college.
Right. And are you older or younger than your brother FK? Because you guys seem to have had parallel journeys in a lot of ways.
Well, we absolutely have, and I'm a year and 2 months older than he is, and but he says he taught me everything I know. So there you go.
What is your relationship with FK and growing up with him as an older brother? Was that dynamic quite similar as the stereotypical one, or how did you guys get on?
It was really true. We were great brothers. I would wrestled with him and beat him up until about age 16 when he went away to be a lumberjack for the summer, and he came back really ripped. And then I learned diplomacy after that. But we always, especially growing up, we came from an entrepreneurial family, and we were always interested in, somehow getting into business together, starting a business, that kind of thing.
Right. And so you, did you take some sort of business education at university? What did you take in university?
So Tulane, I was an undergrad business, and then I worked for a couple of years, and then went back to get a master's in business at Kellogg, which is the business school for Northwestern University in Chicago.
Where did that take you in your career trajectory from college?
Well, when I left college, I was selling construction products, actually acoustical ceiling systems, down in southern Texas. And being a Yankee at that time, selling construction products to good old boy contractors down in southern Texas, it was an experience. You got knocked down into the gutter often, and you had to pick yourself back up and get back on with the sales. So that was a really good learning experience. And from there, I went to business school. And after business school, then I joined Molex, which was a company that manufactured electrical connectors based in Chicago. And I specialized in the telecom and personal computer industry.
So that's what brought you all the way over to Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Back then, when I was in the personal computer selling in the personal computer industry, the first laptop, it wasn't even a laptop, it was a portable computer, it was a compact computer, and it was almost the size of a rollerboard that went into the overhead bin in an airplane. And it's wild how things have evolved since then.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And did you like working for Molex at that time? And you were a marketing manager, from what I understand. Is that right?
I was.
Did you enjoy that?
Well, I thought it was super challenging, and it was nice to be in the telecom and personal computer industries because they were so leading edge back in the early 80s. I remember calling on Apple Computer, HP, and all those great names. And but the culture of the company was really tough. It was really it had very aggressive. They had very aggressive objectives, and they had very limited resources, and it was demanding in a way that wasn't comfortable.
Right.
So that was an interesting lesson that we took with us as we started SRAM. We wanted to create a place that was fun to work, that was challenging, that was competitive, but that people really enjoyed working in.
Mm. Yeah, I remember that about the telecom industry. It wasn't enjoyable, but I think for me that's how it was. That's how work was supposed to be. I didn't know any different, and I fully agree. So, what was your sort of sporting and athletic upbringing like at that time? Were you into cycling, or what were you doing for leisure and athletic?
I was probably running was what I did for exercise the most. And then one winter we heard about this snowshoe race up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and so we rented a motorhome, and a couple of the guys that ended up starting SRAM and I, went up there, and we ran this snowshoe race. And as paybacks for me taking them up there to run a snowshoe race in the middle of January in the freezing cold, on big clunky snowshoes, then I was challenged to do a triathlon. And that's really how I circled back into bicycles and training for the triathlon. And so it kind of started with a snowshoe race, and then then training for a triathlon. But I wasn't a great athlete. I was a weekend athlete, so to speak.
Yeah. And how did triathlon sort of form your thinking into possibly doing grip shift or the concept behind that? What was that like?
Well, I think it was because I wasn't a really good cyclist. I mean, I could move my legs, and I had good stamina in my legs and that kind of thing. But I wasn't technically a good cyclist. And back then, in the mid '80s, you had to reach down to the down tube to shift gears. And I read a book that said, your most efficient way to cycle is at 90 RPMs, and so shift gears to stay at 90 RPMs. And training in Chicago with potholes and traffic and wind, it was really hard for me, not being a good cyclist, to regularly reach down to my down tube and shift gears. And so mentally, I just thought, you know what, we got to move the shifting to the handlebars. And that was just something I had in my mind from training for triathlons.
Right. And I guess the tradition of cycling, you were allowed to think freely on this because you didn't come from that ingrained background, I guess, eh?
I think that's so key. I really do. You didn't have a preconceived notion, and there weren't any boundaries because you didn't know. I mean, I didn't know that somehow you were supposed to shift from the down tube. I just said, no, this doesn't seem to be safe or comfortable.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And what was cycling back in those days like? Was it a booming sport, or was triathlon the big thing, or what's your recollection of that?
Yeah, back when we started the company in 87, I think triathlons were on a nice growth path. Road bikes were on a downswing, and mountain bikes were on a steep growth path at the time.
Yeah. So you were training for a triathlon. You thought there has to be a better way to do this. What was your process like thinking about what those ways might be? And how did you even go about getting a prototype ready?
So remember, my brother and I had always, we'd always talk about, could we start a business? Could we get something going? And that was always in the back of our mind. And FK at the time had actually started a carbon fiber business, creating some waste disposal containers. And at the time, I was still working for Molex, and then I stopped doing that to work on a buyout of another company with my dad, and that buyout fell through about 3 weeks later. So then I didn't have a job.
Oh no!
That was in March, and so I went out and I went skiing with a college friend of mine, and I was riding the chairlift with his brother, who is this really crazy, brilliant engineer. We were talking about entrepreneurial ideas. And I came out, I gave him a couple of ideas. And I said, look, one of the ideas, I said, can we make a twist shifter that goes on the end of a handlebar for a bike? And he said, yeah, I can prototype that for you. And so that's March. And in May, he's living in San Diego. In May, he says, hey, he calls me up and says, hey, I got a prototype. You come out and ride it. And I rode it. I went out and ride it. And it was exactly what I imagined. And I was super excited. Yeah. And so I said, well, look, let me, I've been to business school, so I know all the answers and that kind of thing. So let me write a business plan. Let me do a little research. And maybe we can get this thing together and start a business. And so I do all that, and I come up with this great business plan. We're going to sell 100,000 systems the first year, and we're going to be immediately profitable, and we'll be on the beach in the second year, and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, it was very compelling, and so he decided to drop. I think it was in August. He decided to stop his nicely paying job in San Diego, and I don't know how I did this, but I convinced him to move to Chicago to start our business in Chicago, and from there, that's how this thing really started to get rolling.
That's a huge bet, and so the prototype. Thinking and looking back now, what did that look like?
It was the first prototype was just a screw knob that pulled and released cable. But as a good engineer, his view was let's try and achieve the function in the simplest way possible. And that was with a worm screw and a knob. And that gave me the feeling that we were achieving the function in the proper way.
Right.
The next thing we talked about was, and this is in 87, index shifting was becoming the big thing at the time. The worm screw didn't have any detents in it. So we talked about how would we do index shifting with this, and he came up with this concept of using a helical can that you rotated and had detents, and what formed the detent was a hill and a valley system, and the hill actually provided over travel for the derailleur and then released it back to center. So it was really a pretty ingenious and simple design.
Had STI shifting been invented at that time, like some sort of index?
Yeah, at the time, I don't think STI had been invented, but SIS shifting had been. And so that was index shifting from the down tube.
Got it.
Okay. So Shimano had index shifting from the down tube. Suntour had index shifting from the down tube, and we were moving to index shifting from the handlebars.
Yeah.
And then a year and a half later, Shimano came out with their first STI system, which was their integrated brake shifter from the handlebars.
Got it. And with the first prototype, did you have like a drop bar bike with the grip shift? Did you call it grip shift at the time, or twist shift, or did you even have a name for it?
Yeah, when we first commercialized it in January of '88, it was called grip shift, and I think that I don't think we used any other name for it than grip shift. I think we settled
Yeah.
on that about October, November of 87.
And the prototype, was it on a drop bar or a flat bar, just the simplest thing possible, or
It was on drop bar.
drop bar? Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. Because my only experience remembering as far back with SRAM as I can was on a mountain bike. And I've asked around and no one around here can remember on drop bars at all. So it's hard to imagine.
Well, there were only a few of them. You know, when the business plan said, we're going to sell 100,000 systems the first year. And it turned out, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it turned out we only sold 800 systems. So there was a little bit of a difference there. And that may be why you didn't get one.
It sounds like typical business plan stuff, right? You just optimistic scenario and then adjust on the fly, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely is. Absolutely is. Great lesson learned too. You know, it's never going to be the way you think it, the way you plan for it.
Yeah. Now, so the engineer you had prototype this, his name was Sam. Was that correct?
Correct. It was Sam Patterson.
Sam Patterson, right? One of the other original founders.
Correct.
Now, you convinced him to move to Chicago to create a business. Did you have anyone else? Did you bring anyone else to the team at that time, or?
Yeah. So the second guy that I brought was a fraternity brother. His name was Scott King, and Scott, after school, got his law degree, and then he had started several small businesses. So he knew how to get a business up and going, and he's always a gung ho. You know, let's just get it done. Doesn't matter, how hard it is. We'll get it done. And he had the knowledge of the legal side that you need as you're starting a business to do payroll and taxes and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And how about FK? What was FK's view on this? How was his reaction to your idea?
He thought it was a good idea. He liked what he was doing at the time. But I convinced him and a couple other guys to stop what they were doing and to join the effort. And it was terrific. And FK's, similar to Scott, but in a different way. I mean, he's got, great energy, great stamina, and just absolutely committed to getting it done. And so it's great to have him on the team as well.
Do you consider yourself a great salesman? Because it sounds like those are the biggest pitches of your life.
I think maybe you're right. Those were pretty big. Those were pretty big pitches. No, the best salesman though was Mike Mercury. He's also someone who joined in October, and he was a salesman at Molex that I worked with, and he is the best salesman in the world. And it was great to have him on board. And he took on the OEM sales responsibility.
Right.
He did a terrific job.
So you got this band of, what would it be, 4, including yourself and FK, Scott and Sam?
And there was one more, Jeff Shoup, who also came from Molex. And Jeff was he was just a get-it-done guy, super organized, super fast, just got it done. And we put him in charge of manufacturing, and he did a fabulous job.
Wow. So you were able to convince yourself and 5 others to quit their jobs, come over for a very, at the time, it would have been a big idea. You would have been, I imagine, really convinced that this was going to work, according to your business plan.
I was. I thought this was the new sliced toast, and I just couldn't imagine it not taking off. And but it didn't. So,
did you know what you were getting into? Did you know you were going up against Shimano? I mean, the Goliath of the industry, or was ignorance bliss at the time?
Good way to put it. Ignorance was absolutely bliss. And if we had known what we were headed into, we probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
And then we got into it, and the fear of failing was such a motivator
Mm.
And we also thought we had a good idea, but we just had to keep going. And actually, it was an evolution of grip shift, the original grip shift, that became the better idea, and how we really took off.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere, don't you?
Yeah.
So you guys, from what I understand, you gave yourself a nominal salary each. Where did you and you started the company? Where did you get the money to be able to make that commitment? That's fairly
Yeah.
big at the time, I imagine, at that point of your career.
It was, and so our family's been fortunate, so we were able to put some savings together from us, but also knock on the moms and dads' door and say, hey, guess what? We got this great idea. We're going to build this great business, and if you front us a little money, we'll pay it back really quickly. And so they did that, and we stumbled along for 3 years, and we kept growing the pile that we had borrowed from them, and it was getting pretty stressful. But eventually, we got it turned around. So it was a family finance business, and we're fortunate to be in the position to do that. We tried to get some venture capital along the way, but nobody really would talk to us.
So what was when you finally got a productized sample and you were going to go to market with this? What was that like? Where did you start with that, getting the word out and launching the Grip Shift?
Well, a couple ways. So our first trade show was the Long Beach show in January of 1988. We first started talking to customers after we had committed to go with the company, and after all these, everybody left their nice, safe jobs. In December, and Merck drove down the street to Schwinn and got an appointment with the product manager at Schwinn and said, hey, I just want you to know we got this great thing coming. I can't show it to you right now, but let's talk in January after the Long Beach show, because you're really going to want to buy a lot of these. And so I thought that was a good first OEM sales effort. And we get to the Long Beach show as new folks in the bike industry. And it's a pretty clubby industry in a certain way. And we get there, and we get to our booth, and there at our booth there's a sign for everybody's name, a small, show sign. And our name was spelled SRAM, SCRAM.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so we didn't feel really good about that. And our name in the catalog was SRAM, so that was how we got welcomed into the industry. But I remember,
how did you come up with the name?
Well, we tried to do a cool name, of course, and we did all sorts of searches on all the cool names, and all the cool names were taken. So I think it was 45 days before the show, we had to submit our name, and so that the night before that, I played alphabet soup with the initials of everybody in the company, and settled on SRAM, which was Scott is the S, and my middle name is Ray, and Sam is the AM. So we got Scott, Ray, and Sam, and that's kind of how we got born as a company.
What were some of the other names that you kind of went to first? Do you remember?
No, there were some silly names. There was one that an advertising company pitched to us. It was called OLO, O-L-L-O, and the L's were kind of kicked over to the side. So the O's were bicycle tires, and the L's were supposedly the bike frame. But and that may be how we formally registered the company to start, but we quickly evolved to SRAM.
Did you guys have any knowledge or insight to what a good name for a brand is at that time, or was this just completely just just by chance? Because it does have great, like it takes on a meaning of itself. It's got 4 letters. It's syllable. It's great.
Yeah. I think what we believed at the time, or what I believed at the time, was really the brand takes on the meaning of the activities and the people over time. And, what was Nike? Nike's a great name, but it wasn't a great name when it started. It was a great name. It's a great name over time. And you can look at that, specialized. Well, how did, was Specialized really specialized? Not until, Mike built the company and put all the time and effort behind it. And same with Trek. They became what those names, how people lived with those names over time. So I like your point, Wade. It was short. There wasn't anything else really like it out there. It was a little awkward to pronounce, but I thought that wasn't bad over time. People would go, they call it SRAM, they call it SRAM, they call any number of things. But over time, it's proven to be good.
Yeah. Yeah, it has a meaning of its own and no preconceptions with it, even for new people.
Yep.
How come FK's name didn't get into that? Just it didn't fit, and he was okay with that, or?
Yeah, everybody was fine with it. It turns out, Scott. I mean, Sam was the first guy to commit. Scott was the second guy to commit. So really, myself and Scott and Sam are the first 3 people in, right. And then Merck and Jeff and FK came in after us. We couldn't get everybody's initials in, and people, nobody really had an ego about it.
Yeah. So you're at the trade show. You're sitting at a booth, and what was the reception like at the industry besides the SRAM mess up?
Yeah.
Were people interested? Were you turned away? Were you?
I'd say people were mildly interested because no one had seen something that shifted from the handlebars in that fashion before. And so people were mildly interested. They thought the aesthetic of it at the end of the handlebar was bulbous. It was like a bulb at the end of the handlebar, and it didn't fit with the aesthetic of the bike. I don't think it looked bad. It was something new at the end of the handlebar.
Yeah.
But I think that was a real barrier. When we first came out with it, it came with its own set of handlebars, and we used the most popular sized handlebars, which is 40 centimeter width at the time. But what we didn't understand was at the level of rider that we were selling to, that everybody had their own personal width and their own personal preference for drop. And we had taken that away from them. And so there were so many things that we didn't understand and know about the industry as we stepped into it. But we came into the trade show with an expectation of writing orders. And I think at the end of the trade show, we had 6 orders each for a 6-pack of trial. And we went, wow, that was a whiff. And so we got back to Chicago, and we put everybody in their own personal cars, and everybody drove to a different part of the country and started calling on dealers and trying to sell these. The actual system came in a triangle box. It was fairly large, which also didn't fit with the tight space in a bike dealer. So it was fairly large. It was a triangle box to accommodate the handlebar that came with the system. So pretty quickly we found that our inventory of specially made, hard anodized handlebars, which I think our first order was 20,000 from a Japanese supplier, really we weren't going to need them.
Wow.
And Sam went and he created a system then with an insert that would go into the end of an individual's handlebar that had a bearing surface. And so the second generation grip shifts, which I think we got going by the springtime, the second generation grip shift did not require the handlebar.
Right.
But it required you to drill holes in your handlebar, which was a little awkward for some people. It wasn't awkward for us because we got really good at it. And what we found was that criterium racers really liked it, although because they were criterium racers, they didn't have any money. And so we had to seed the racing community with free product. And the other group that thought it was pretty neat were the triathletes, because at the time the Scott DH bar had just come out, the forward swept bar and now you had shifting up you could have your shifting up on the handlebars as opposed to down on the down tube. So that was a pretty compelling application. So those were two good applications for grip shift at the time.
And was that change after you had thousands of these unsold handlebars and grip shift parts left unsold? Did that change come after? Or did you change on the fly?
We changed on the fly, and we were just stuck with a lot of inventory for handlebars, and we're stuck with a lot of inventory for triangle boxes. Because the way you source packaging is like, if you buy 1,000, it costs X. If you buy 10,000, it's just a little bit more. Anyway, we had a lot of boxes.
Yeah. And this was all made in Chicago around that at the time?
Yeah, the packaging, the plastic grip shifts, the one fastener that was part of the system was they were all made in Chicago. The handlebars came from Japan. The handlebar supply.
Yeah. Okay. And with the Scott sort of tri bars, did Greg LeMond have an influence in making those more popular? Just after, it sounds like, the time when he won the Tour and on those types of bars, did that have an influence on it, or not really to the tri market?
It may have. My sense is the tri market was separate, and but the winners of the Ironman and all the triathlons were also using them. So they didn't really need Greg to drive them forward.
Right. So around this time, from what I understand, Bob Mionsky, how do you pronounce his name? The Olympian?
Bob Mionsky, yeah.
Mionsky. So you guys got him on grip shift, and he was racing in, was it LA? What Olympics was it? Barcelona?
Seoul, Korea. Yeah.
Tell me about that. Seeing your product, watching him on time, mixing it up, possibly to win a gold medal in the road race.
It was just incredible. And at the time, the road race is scheduled to be televised, and basically it's substantially in its entirety. And at the time, the day before, a 100-yard sprinter, his name was Ben, I forgot. He was a Canadian. He tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, and so all of the coverage.
Ben Johnson,
yes,
that's right.
Ben Johnson. He did. So he got tested positive. So the road race coverage was preempted to talk about Ben Johnson, and so it was devastating. There was just a little tiny snippet of coverage for the road race, and Bob missed third place by the width of a wheel rim, and he came in fourth. But he was a great guy, and it was great to have him on board.
Did you get a mention? Were you able to use it in any tangible way?
Well, we use it for advertising, and it may have helped some, but really, I think we had a good product at the time, but the aesthetic and the way that the OEMs were focusing their time and energies really didn't let anybody really pick it up and take it and run with it, because recall at the time that the road market was going down, the Tri-market was coming up some, and the mountain bike was where everybody was putting all their focus. So one of our great stories starting up was, we get to July of '88, and we've only sold 400 sets of grip shift or something like that, and the retailers we had sold them to did not give us any sense that there was momentum for the product at all. We could give them away to crit racers. We could sell them to some triathletes that had the Scott bars, but there really wasn't a market that was growing. And my brother came to me and said, "Look, Stan, this road thing isn't working. We should work on a grip shift system for mountain bikes." And I said, "No, look, I'm the one that's been to business school. I wrote this business plan. I'm really confident we'll get there. We just have to keep focusing on the road market." And like a great brother, he just nodded his head and said, "You're right." And he went right around and worked with Sam on creating a mountain bike shifter. But then he prototyped, and he showed me the prototype, and we took it around. Now we took this around to customers, and customers got excited about that.
Really?
And so we really shifted our focus towards the mountain bike side after that. But it wasn't me that did that. It was my brother, which brothers usually don't follow their older brothers. So it was a good
exactly. That's fantastic. And so around 89, 90, I'm kind of just going by the timeline here. You guys filed a complaint against Shimano, and how did you find that dealers weren't picking up the product because of Shimano's the way they were pricing? Can you give me a bit of background on that?
Yeah. So there was not a problem with dealers in the aftermarket. There were two ways to go to market for us. One was aftermarket, and the other was OEM, having it come standard on a bike that you would buy from bike shop.
Yep.
And the aftermarket wasn't an issue. What was the issue, though, was the OEM side of the business, which was going to be the 3/4 of the business.
Okay.
And at the time, Shimano had a pricing policy in place that literally said, your price is X if you buy a full group, and it's X plus 10% if you substitute a single component out of that group.
Right.
And so if the OEM didn't buy the shifter, the entire price of the group set was more than what it would have been if they bought the shifter and then threw away the shifter. And it was just it was a pricing policy that, given Shimano's market power, that at least in the U.S. was not legal, in our opinion. And that's why we wrote the complaint. Said, look, we need to change this pricing structure, and you need to let people buy individual components without penalty.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what that was all about. And it was about a 2-year effort. And in the end, Shimano changed their policy, and I think that was a really good thing. It was necessary for us to succeed, but it was also, I think, a really good thing for the rest of the industry, because it allowed other companies to flourish or to start and try to get traction. I think it was also ultimately good for Shimano as well, because I think having a better mix and a better blend has strengthened the industry as a whole. And I think it's grown because of the efforts and work that we've all put into it.
Was that as simple as filing the complaint and getting them to change, or did it, in that 2 years, was it quite the process? Was it quite draining from a energy point of view and financial point of view?
Yes, it was a huge effort from a financial and time and effort point of view. It included full-blown discovery in the U.S. and also in Japan. We had a team that flew to Japan and read documents, a warehouse of Shimano's documents, and it was the full program.
So,
And
how are sales going at this point? Again, I keep thinking you're, less than 10 guys at this point, I imagine, taking on Shimano from both a competitive point of view and from a legal point of view. Where were you guys at as a company at this point?
I think our sales were probably close to $1 million a year,
Okay.
maybe 800,000. And so we weren't profitable. We were, coming to the end of our rope, but we needed to get through, we just needed to get through this issue with the Shimano price policy in order for us to be able to sell product to Trek, Specialized, Schwinn, Diamondback at the time, and to the bike industry. Yeah, and fortunately, I think it was might have been September of '89 or September of '90, maybe September of 1990. Shimano offered to settle and change that policy.
Looking back, did that save the business, or where was the business going to go if that didn't happen?
I think we would have been blocked.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, we could not have, in our view, we could not have just sold a aftermarket shifter and had a viable business.
Right. And what changes did that immediately take in terms of your business? Did it allow you to financially, was there a financial settlement that allowed you to grow, or did it just open up the market that brought in the sales?
The key was there was a financial settlement, but I can't talk about that.
Yeah.
But the key thing operationally was that it opened up the market. At the same time, we received pretty good feedback from our customer base that our current mountain bike product was good but not great. And our focus at the time was that we wanted three things: size, rotation, and transition. We wanted to reduce its size, we wanted to reduce the rotation that was required, and we wanted it to transition seamlessly from inboard of the stationary grip to the stationary grip. And so Sam was working super hard on alternative designs to what we currently had. And he finally had a breakthrough. He worked through Christmas that year, and he called us up. I think it was the day before New Year's or something. He said, "Look, I think I've got it." And we go back in the day after New Year's, and it's a eureka moment. And so he's got this new technology. 3 months earlier, the market, in our view, had been opened up, and we ran that technology immediately up to the guys at Trek. And actually, I think John Burke was one of the first people at the time to take a look at it. And we got them inspired, or they got themselves inspired, to use that to help define the hybrid bikes they were coming out with at the time. Skinny tire, flat bar bikes. And so Trek, Diamondback, Schwinn were all early customers of this new grip shift technology, as we rolled out.
And did Trek give you a big order that spurred you into action? And
they did. I think they said that they would buy 70,000 or something like that the first year.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was big, and then I went to Taiwan to talk to their OEM producer, which is the Merida factory at the time. And I talked to Michael Chang, who heads up Merida today. And I said, "Michael, I just want to let you know that Trek has specified this, and you're building this bike. So, our lead time from Chicago will be 30 days, and it'll be 45 days on the water, and we'll give you 30-day terms. And he looked at me and said, Stan, the only way I'm going to support that product and buy that product is if you make it here in Taiwan. But he said, if you make it here in Taiwan, I will buy it and I will support it. And so I didn't fly home from that trip, and I stayed in Taiwan, and we set up a local factory.
That sounds like a massive step. 70,000. That's close to your 100,000 business plan. And
it is. Yeah.
At the time, what was that like for you?
It was huge. It was validation. We were creating a viable business. We, between Trek and others that were specifying the product for that model year, we could see that during the course of the next model year, we had a chance to become a profitable company. And
right.
So that just we were almost beaten down through the legal process, and then we got the settlement, and that gave us some energy, and then Mike Mercury goes up to Trek and really leads this process of securing the specification with Trek and then with other bike brands, and it just gave us a ton more energy, and we just focused on getting it done.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. Put in context of the time, we're looking at 1990-ish, I imagine you're talking about. Now, I imagine you weren't on email. There's no FaceTime. And you're setting up production in halfway across the world in Taiwan. Like even just to talk to Marita, you mentioned you had to go over there, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that process in Taiwan. I mean, you're not speaking the language. You don't know the landscape of the industry there. What was that like for you?
It was a wonderful time as a relatively young business guy. We had a small company. I think I understood what needed to be done pretty well, and every minute of every day I was making progress, and it was really cool. I mean, the traction under our feet was just it was so great. And it's different as you become a bigger company because you're not doing everything yourself, and you have to you lead, you manage, you work through other people, you inspire people to do things. And it's a lot different than when you're a small company and you have to do everything, and you do everything and it gets done, and you don't have committees to talk through. You don't have, we were done writing business plans by that time. And so it was a really fun time. And it was a new country. I'd been there once or twice before. And back then, in the early 90s in Taiwan, nobody stopped at stoplights, and there's a lot of anarchy, and within the context of this one, when the government decided to do something in Taiwan, it would get it done. But in the meantime, people did whatever they felt was right, including there's nobody coming, I'm going to go through this red light, or I'm going to go through the red light, and now I'll swerve if somebody else comes. It was a wild time. And but but it was really a lot of fun, and it was hard work but very satisfying.
I imagine what you're saying is it was very tangible, the progress you were making when at that company size, and everything you did had impact.
Yes,
That's safe to say?
very safe to say. Yeah, that's well described.
So I've never gone through this process myself, but what's it like getting, one grip shift made, and then you have to actually scale to 70,000? Is that nice and a seamless process, or they're actually, does 70,000 come out the way that one comes out?
Well, we were really fortunate. We had a very simple design. There were might be 8 pieces to it, and 6 of those were injection molded pieces. So
Okay.
if you get the mold right, then the pieces all come out the same.
Right.
And
Okay.
so that was really, really helpful to what we were doing. If it was much more complicated than that, and I think about 6 years later, we proved that we had a lot of learning to do as manufacturing as we came out with our first derailleurs. It would have been more difficult. But at the time, we were able to execute on it. And with the other orders that came along, it was, I think our first year was about 250,000 of these SRT grip shifts.
Oh, you did call them SRT, the
Size rotation transition.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And did Sam design that with production in mind, or was that just the nature of the design that he made the grip shift, and it was just very fortunate that from a production capacity it was simple from there on?
No, he absolutely designed it with manufacturing in mind, and he did a fabulous job. And none of us really had that much hands-on manufacturing experience. So Sam had to imagine how it would work, and he did a great job doing that.
Quite the foresight.
Yeah.
So you sound like you're getting momentum, you're making progress. And what was the next step for SRAM after that? You've made some sales. Where do you go from there?
So we had this fabulous trajectory from there. So we started that year. We made 250,000 systems. The next year it was 500,000, then 2 million, then 5 million, then 8.6 million systems for 1996. We were on a rocket ship ride, and probably in 96 we had 60% of the share for shifters in the marketplace, and that would be for mountain bikes and hybrids at that time. So that was an incredible run.
Man. And you obviously wanted to grow past that. You created a derailleur to create more of a complete shifting system. Was that just an expansion of growth, or was there necessity behind that, or was that both?
It was probably both. Although at the time we thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't actually a necessity. We were doing well selling our shifters with Shimano derailleurs, and the shifters were profitable, and we were doing really well, and the industry liked them. In 1996, and it's hard to tell if this was intentional or not, but we had a lot of market share at the top of the mountain bike market, and that was spec'd with Shimano XT derailleurs. Mm-hmm. And so we have all this market share, and we get to the Eurobike show with all the new bikes that are out there, and we start hearing reports of shifting problems. And technically, the twist shifters require a little bit more return force than a trigger shifter. Mm-hmm. And whether it was intentional or not, who knows? But Shimano gets to gets to control their own rear derailleurs.
Yeah.
And the rear derailleur spring, rear derailleur return spring in the XT derailleurs was lighter than it was the year before. And so, when going to a smaller cog in the back, oftentimes SRAM grip shift with the Shimano XT rear derailleur would get hung up or wouldn't shift as quickly as people would like. And so with all the market share that we had at the time, that caused a big problem, and our shifter was blamed, and Shimano's derailleur was okay. And truth be told, their derailleur worked with their shifter, and it would go up and down the cog set better than it would work with our shifter. So that was the peak of our grip shift OEM sales, and then they started diminishing over time. So today, grip shift twist shifters are in the aftermarket, but they're really not on OEM bikes, and I think that event had something to do with it.
Right. So the ESP derailleur was a necessary fix to solve that problem?
Well, we did want to get into derailleurs. We decided we wanted to get into all the components on the bike, and the ESP derailleur we thought was a good idea. It had a different actuation ratio, one that created more tolerance in the system.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to we prototyped it with plastic B knuckle that we machined out of plastic, and it worked fine. It passed our testing and all that kind of thing. But when we transitioned to injection molded B knuckles, the injection molded B knuckles weren't as strong as the machined B knuckles, and they broke. And so we had a misfire on our first derailleur system.
Did you sort that out, or was in hindsight, was it just not successful, or did you correct it?
I think we had to go back to the drawing board, because again, where we had expertise was in injection molding. Mm-hmm. But now we found we had to figure out how to machine, stamp, forge metal components. But we didn't have any of that experience in-house. And in 1997, the Sachs Bicycle Component Division of Mannesmann Sachs became available for sale.
Right.
And those guys had a lot of metal experience. Yeah. And so that was a key part of following through with that acquisition.
That seems like, what did they do? Like chains and bearings at the time? What was their main in their wheelhouse?
There were two pieces of business that they had. The first piece and the largest piece were internal gear hubs. They made 3, 5, and 7-speed internal gear hubs for the European trekking and commuter market. And they were the largest provider of internal gear hubs at the time. Yeah. The other piece was related to external drive components, derailleurs and shifters, etc., that they had pieced together through some French companies, Maillard, Heuret, Cetis. Yeah. And so there were 2 French factories making external drive components, and 1 German factory in Schweinfurt, Germany, that was making the internal gear hubs. And then they had a product development team, a German product development team, mostly German product development team, that was working both the internal gear hub side and the external drive side.
I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about this, and he mentioned that he used to have a Sachs group set. So we thought, I had to look it up because I'm like, I never heard of that. Yeah. So how did it come about that this came for sale again on the other side of the world? 97, again, not a hugely connected world. How did that come about, and what made you decide that this is a good investment for what our vision is?
Well, if you go back to so Mannesmann Sachs at the time was about I want to say a 5 to 10 billion euro. I guess it would have been euros at the time, but anyway, $5 to $10 billion company that had essentially three pieces of business. One was the Mannesmann piece was the high growth telecom piece. The Sachs piece was automotive parts and the bicycle division. The company had really started in 1895 by Ernst Sachs, who made the first freewheeling hub for high wheelers. That's how the company started. Then they made the first 3-speed internal gear hub a little bit later, and then they got through the wars, and then they got into the automotive parts, and automotive parts became a several $billion-dollar division, and the bicycle division was about $120 million at the time. And the bicycle division wasn't doing very well, but they couldn't restructure the bicycle division without creating a strike at the much larger automotive division. And so their idea was, can we find the bicycle division a new home? And the head of their bicycle division, who I knew, approached me at the Taipei Bicycle Show in '97 and said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" And we thought, boy, that would be a stretch, but that would get us the engineering, it would get us a broader product line, it would get us more European expertise, and so we committed to doing it, and we negotiated the program successfully and got it done.
That would have been a costly acquisition. How did you go about doing that?
No, we just used bank financing. It was expensive, but it wasn't too expensive, and but it got us. What it got us was just incredible in terms of the breadth of technology and the breadth of the product lines. It was terrific.
What was the mission statement that had become to form in your mind at this point of the company, and how did you see these acquisitions as fulfilling that?
I don't know that we had an articulated mission statement as much as this sense of how do we get into more of the components that are on the bike. Well, I think a value that we recognized was the relationship with the customer, and what else could we sell to this trusted relationship with a customer that we could profitably sell to that customer. And so that clearly meant expanding the drive, getting into a full drivetrain, because we experienced what happens if you don't have all the components in the group set. But it was also good business, and we knew we couldn't snap our fingers and get it overnight. We had to take it, a step at a time. Then you fast forward to 2003, when we acquired RockShox, and we viewed that as a really, really interesting acquisition, because not only were the suspension components being sold to our customer that we had the trusted relationship with, but also it was something different than Shimano had, and that gave us a different leverage point, or an additional thing to talk about than just drivetrain. And we were buying the leader in suspension at the time, and although they were having some difficulty, but that was the second really good acquisition.
Had you ever thought of getting into bike frames, or has that always been this no-go area with you guys and your OEM customers?
It's always a no-go. So far, we certainly didn't want to be assembling bikes or doing anything like that. Sometimes we look at the lead times of bike frames in the industry today, and we go, why does it take 5 months to order a bike frame? we don't want to sell bikes, but we deliver our components in 30 days. So I wish the bike frame guys would pick it up a little bit.
So jumping ahead now, you had a great run at mountain biking. You were there. You were very well respected. Who were your competitors at the time besides Shimano? I mean, what was there? Sun Tour? Whatever happened to Sun Tour?
Yeah, Sun Tour kind of lost their way in the early 90s. And I think Shimano's SIS system was better. And for that first part of the 90s, through 96 at least, a lot of their SIS was working with our grip shift. And Sun Tour's derailleurs and their shifting strategy just didn't quite work as well as Shimano. I think a lot of it was the cassette. And so they just kind of dropped off the drivetrain side, and they started focusing on entry-level suspension and tried to maintain crankset business.
So in mountain biking, the two big group set and drivetrain name brands were SRAM and Shimano, correct?
Correct.
And you had largely abandoned the road market since FK said, hey, let's go mountain biking. And in 2005, you guys launched Rival and Force. What changed your thinking and what led you to that decision?
Our guys led us to that decision. Maybe a little bit of FK, a little bit of Mike Mercury, and frankly, you go down a level or two. There was interest in the organization to get into road bike components. I did not hold up a flag and say, we have to get into road bike components. The concept of getting into road bike components really came up from the enthusiasts in the organization who said, look, we're doing well on mountain bikes, but we also like road biking, and we've got some good ideas on how to get into road bikes, and let us do that. And I just stayed out of the way.
You would have seen the road growing since 1999 with Lance Armstrong winning the Tour de France and being at the epicenter of that in the U.S. After that explosion happened, was that part of your periphery, and seeing that led you to get onto the road as well?
Sure, and I think that was some of the business case for it. That when you looked at the value of the bikes being sold, and the component value of the bikes being sold on the road side, that was a very large segment that we weren't participating in. So that was an area to get into.
So then getting into the road market, you're going into this segment which had two of the historic incumbents, Shimano and Campagnolo. Was that a big bet for the company at the time? I mean, I remember everyone talking about it, raising an eyebrow, wondering, how is SRAM going to pull this off?
Yeah, so no, I would say it was a reasonable bet. We put some meaningful chips on the table, but we were much more confident in our engineering and our product concepts and our ability to analyze how we would succeed at that point than certainly we'd been as we were in our earlier years. And also our view was that although Campagnolo was out there, they were primarily an aftermarket company. They were not selling their components successfully as original equipment. And so it was really a one-horse race with Shimano, and that's where we were focused.
It seems like a big step for any brand getting into the road market to receive that authenticity through endorsement from the pro ranks. How is that journey for you, and the demands that it can bring and the spotlight that it can shine onto your products and your company? Tell me about that.
Well, so it was super challenging and super helpful. What the pros do to the components is mind-boggling. And the torque loads that they put through those are so different than what the average rider does. We designed something as strong as we thought it needed to be, and we get bent chain rings coming back from these big sprinters and stuff. I mean, they're crazy. But we also had to not only design the components, but we had to build the relationship slowly, not slowly from our point of view, but you had to build trust with the race team managers, and then the race team mechanics, and then the race teams and the riders, and all that takes time, and it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to be persistent. You have to have good quality components, and you have to have the right relationships to first open the door and then nurture the relationship as you go. And our guys were really brilliant at that. And again, that wasn't me. That was our guys.
Is the saying true, what wins on Sunday sells on Monday? In your experience, have you seen a direct link between pro sponsorships and sales?
I think there's a good link to it. And it doesn't, I don't think it happens all the time, but I think it happens regularly or often. Lance was, I think Lance was unique in that. I mean, he was not only was he a really strong racer, but he was a character, and I think that combination is important for winning on Sunday and selling on Monday. Michael Jordan, kind of the same thing. But you can have certain athletes that are winners, but quiet, and I don't think that has the same marketing effect as somebody that's more dynamic.
Well, in the end, it's a human connection. It's a people sport, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned Lance earlier. I remember the Wall Street Journal reporting that he had either bought into the company or looked to buy into the company. Whatever happened with that?
Yeah. So the story there was in 2008, we decided to take in a private equity investment. And so we're going to sell a minority investment to a private equity company. And at the time, we were sponsors of the Radio Shack team. And in the private equity process, what the private equity guys are doing is they're selling you money, and money is the same. And so they're trying to distinguish themselves as private equity companies with various other ideas. The particular private equity company that finally won the bid for to become our minority investor brought to the table Lance, and Lance was a pal of the head private equity partner, and it turned out to be Lehman Brothers Merchant Banking. So that was a story in and of itself. At any rate, so as Lance came into this agreement, he was being paid by Lehman Brothers Merchant Banking to be part of this and to say good things about SRAM and that kind of thing, which was fabulous. Now, Lance's technical feedback is absolutely terrific. And I think despite what happened, there are he has marketing power out there. And so that was something that occurred. It would have turned out, because he ended up riding for Radio Shack that first year, he would have been on our team in any case. But he came in with this private equity group, and the private equity group is the one that was paying him, and that's great.
Did you guys get a private equity partner, or did that end up not going in that direction?
We did. So we signed our deal with Lehman Brothers Merchant Banking on July 30 of 2008, and targeted a close of September 30, 2008. And then Lehman Brothers went bankrupt on September 2014. The whole world at the time was just completely falling apart. I mean, it was a little bit like the COVID crisis, but it was all financial world, and there was no financial floor anywhere. And the Lehman Brothers Merchant Banking subsidiary of Lehman Brothers was solvent. It wasn't bankrupt. And they saw, their only way to the future was to make themselves a valuable asset to the bankruptcy estate administrator. And so it was vital to them that they closed this deal on September 30. And somehow they kept the bank consortium together, and they got their limited partners to actually fund the investment. They got the banks to stay with them and fund the investment. And literally, we're sitting in Las Vegas at the Interbike trade show at the sports book of all places that afternoon. And our banker calls us and he goes, "The funds are coming in." We couldn't believe it. Now, the good thing was we didn't need the money. It was really a strategic diversification. But it turned out that it worked. And then this group, Lehman Brothers Merchant Banking, extracted themselves from the bankrupt estate and became Triatlantic Capital Partners, which then we bought our shares back from in 2011.
I also did read that in 2015 you did look to IPO. What was your thinking at those times, and why did that never happen?
So you got to go through a lot of different lessons and different learnings as you go, and they're all good if you build on them. So we brought the private equity in 2008, and it was good help. It gave us a really good view of the capital markets. They had really good disciplines to add to what we were doing as a business. They helped refine our thinking, and so they were a good partner. But we also were on a very strong growth track during that time frame, and the security they had was very expensive in a certain way as it went through time. So in 2011, I started talking to them about doing an IPO to take them out, and they agreed with that if we could do it at a very high valuation. And my point of view was, especially if I'm going out on the road selling the company in an IPO mode, I wanted the valuation to be whatever the valuation was. There wasn't some artificial threshold that I was going to go out on the road show and not be able to hit it, and then have to go, oh, you know what, we're not going public. I mean, that's just not how I work.
Or a enormous valuation, and you're now stuck with that problem.
Yes, good point. It could be the other way too. So in the spring of 2011, the debt markets were really good. And what we discovered or found was that we could borrow the money to buy them out and then take the company public ourselves. And so it would just be us with our hands on the steering wheel. And so we'd take on a high amount of debt and then get all the accounting cleared up, and then go public ourselves and pay down the debt. And so that was the plan. We bought them out with debt. The accounting, the SEC, the U.S. SEC took a long time to approve the accounting. By then, in August of 2011, the U.S. debt crisis came about. Moody downgraded the U.S. debt or whatever. I don't know what they're going to do now. But anyway, so the IPO market closed, and we couldn't get out. The Euro crisis happened about that time as well. And so the IPO market closed. We couldn't get out, and it turned out to be a good thing because about 3 months later, our sales started to flatline. And if you're selling a growth story and you flatline, you get crushed in the IPO market. So we couldn't go out. You go around another year. We had our road hydraulic brake recall, and so we had some issues. We had some issues there that would have been troublesome if we were in the public market. Along the way, we had been paying down the debt, and so we finally got to a point where we were in the red zone with the debt, and now we're in the green zone, and so now we're not going public. We don't need to do that. We were fortunate. We got across the swamp. We didn't get bitten by any alligators. And now, there's no private equity. We're not going public. We're staying private. and staying focused on our business.
And is this how you want to keep it now? You're happy with owning it and having full autonomy over your decisions?
Absolutely.
Your fate?
Absolutely. It lets us focus on the business which we love. And we love the bike industry. We love designing new products. We love innovation. And we don't have a complex group of shareholders. It's real simple. It's management and the Day family, and we're all going the same direction. And that's a good thing.
With all the acquisitions that you guys have made and the complexity of that with Saks in a foreign country and before the internet was really prominent and Truvative and Avid and all these companies, tell me about how that's gone for you, integrating into your culture, into your aligning with your vision, your supply chain, all that. Tell me how that's gone for you and the playbook for you on that.
I think what's really important is you have to be, and it gets back to culture, and not everybody is this way, but I think you have to be really straightforward with people. You have to be really transparent, and you have to over communicate. And even then, it won't work. I mean, it's a choppy road. Doing acquisitions it's really difficult, and it's really difficult for good reasons. People are involved, but now the IT systems don't talk to each other. The product knowledge isn't really well understood. There's lots of opportunity for misunderstanding. So it's a really difficult thing to do, and it's something that we do very selectively. And we filled out our product base with our acquisitions, and we continue to look at many of the acquisitions that materialize in bike industry space. But we're very, very selective, and our view is we want to, if there's a company that we want to acquire and invest not only the dollars, but actually the distraction and the manpower and figuring out how to integrate them and bring them on board to be a constructive part of SRAM. It's really difficult. That we really want that effort to have a lot of leverage to it and not just be more dollars.
Have you gotten better over the years, or is each one so different from each other that it's different every time?
No, I think we've gotten better, and which doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, which we do, and each one's a little different. So you go, well, I tried to use the RockShox playbook as we bought Truvative, but that didn't work for Truvative. So now we got the RockShox plus Truvative book, and that didn't work for Avid. Now we got the RockShox Truvative plus Avid book, and you just keep building it. But I think the expectation has to be that anytime one does an acquisition, that it's going to be a real challenge.
Looking from the outside, it seems that you have a really, really long-lasting management team with very little turnover at that level. And the culture seems really, really good within SRAM. Is that something that you have made a point of concentrating on over the years, or is that something that's just sort of happened?
I think it's been both. You recall going back to as we started the company, we had our experience at Molex, and Mike Mercury, Jeff Shoup, and I all worked at Molex, and so our part of it was we wanted to build a place that we would have fun working in, and that meant you worked hard, you played hard, you had trust, you had transparency, and you let people make mistakes. And you trusted that people were trying to do the right thing. I think this is absolutely true. No one has ever been fired at SRAM for making a mistake, and we made some big mistakes. But mistakes are part of it, and but you need to build on the trust and the intent and the people you have. And, and people are the greatest asset that you have. And that's what we've tried to do.
What was the thought process leading up to stepping down as the CEO in 2017? What brought you to that decision?
So there are a couple of key things that go into that. One is, after doing the job for 30 years, I thought it was important to transition my role before I had to. But let's do this while we're running full speed, and now let's pass the baton when you're running full speed on the track, not when you're gasping for breath and stumbling. I mean, that was a very clear thing. So I wanted to do the transition now, when I knew that I could keep working if I needed to, but that I also felt getting new blood in after 30 years, and frankly, getting somebody in that had experience in where we were going, as opposed to the original management team and I grew the company from zero to where we are today, a little over 850 million sales, with having to learn how to do it ourselves as we went along. None of us had the experience of where we are today. So I thought that bringing in somebody new that had the experience of where we were going would be a good thing for the organization. The other interesting one was, I originally thought, I go back 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I originally thought that when we made this management change, it would also be important to make an ownership change. But I had an aha moment talking with an experienced business person one day that had been very successful in private business, and he said, that's not the right way to think about it. A different way to think about it is, if you get the management change right, you don't have to make the ownership change. And it's the ownership change that I think destroys culture, because you get a new owner in, you get a private equity company in, or something like that, and then they start telling people what to do in a way that the team hasn't been used to. So that was a really good distinction. So we focused on, look, let's get the management change right, and then we don't have to do an ownership change. And that's where we are today. And we knocked the management change out of the park.
How did you cross paths with Ken Lewisberg? How did you meet him?
So in doing this, we decided, although it's expensive to hire an executive recruiter, we spent a good bit of time talking to them about the culture, the organization, and we actually deliberately, literally, and explicitly said culture fit is the first thing. And they went out and they screened a whole bunch of people and narrowed it down, and we interviewed, I think, 6 people. And Ken was really interesting on several fronts. One, he had an engineering background, and we're a product development company. I do not have an engineering background, so I thought, that's it. That's good. That's a step up. He also was a mountain biker, and actually, when we were doing our interviews, I think one of his sons broke his arm, and so that gave him some street cred and all that kind of thing. So that was good. He'd been global. He'd been around the world. He'd lived in Europe. I think he hadn't lived in the States for 14 years. He'd been in Germany, then China for 6 or 7 years. Then he was most recently living in Switzerland. So he's very familiar with the global business community. And he also was an expert in continuous improvement, or lean. And I was inspired by the book Lean Thinking way back in the 90s, and so I bought a bunch of copies of it, and I passed it around the company, and some things happened, but not a lot happened. But I didn't really have the knowledge or experience to really drive it. And Ken had done 4 continuous improvement implementations in big companies that he had worked with, so he had the perspective on how to really tee that up and drive it forward. And so there were a number of things that I thought, the senior management group thought, the board thought that Ken was bringing to the organization that would be really powerful. But first of all, he was a great culture fit. When we brought him in, and again, this was one of the benefits of making this change before we had to. When we brought him in as COO, not CEO. And he and I knew, and frankly, the senior management team knew, and the board knew that he was going to become CEO. But we brought him in to be COO so that he could experience the organization without being at the top. And he and I could talk about how things work, and he could begin to experiment and build his relationships without the pressures of being CEO. He thought that was a good idea. Not everybody does, but he thought that was a good idea. I thought it was a good idea. As senior management, the board thought it was a good idea, and it was a great idea. And it's been terrific.
You've alluded to the fact, and this is me paraphrasing, but that starting a business from scratch with nothing more than a handful of people and an idea requires a very different skill set than leading a large company that's difficult to steer towards a vision. How have you kept in time with that? And is that something that's come fairly natural to you?
You know, it hasn't. When I was leading it as CEO through 2 years ago, 18 months ago, I was learning all the way along. You know, I did a ton of reading of business books. I talked to a lot of people. We did trial and error. We thought we had good ideas, but again, we didn't know. I mean, when we bought Saks, which was $120 million of revenue, we had $50 million of revenue. You know, so it was, and we'd never done an acquisition before. So I really think what helped us get through it was, you know, we were persistent, we were trustworthy, we said what we wanted to do, and then we would do it. And I think that created a trust and a culture in the organization that helped us get there. We went back. We were talking about the road bike development, and again, you know, we talked, or I mentioned that wasn't an edict from me. That was a groundswell movement from within the organization. We need to get into the road bike market. You know, and I would say, well, how are we going to do that? And I would get the answer, and it would be from different levels of the company. Mike Mercury, who was heading up product development at the time, certainly endorsed it, but he wasn't the guy that said we can do it. It was levels of people below him that said, we have the technology, we have the ideas, we need to go this direction. And so that's been good. I think that I've been a steward of the culture, and I think that I've been a steward of the organization, but it's been the folks within the organization that, you know, since the original grip shift for road bikes, have really done all the brilliant work.
Well, it just goes to show how important building that culture is, hey?
Really does.
So in the past 30 years, have you formulated a mission statement that's your guiding beacon going forward?
Yeah, so we have a great, we call it a purpose statement, actually, slightly nuanced difference. But it's we believe in the power of bicycles and expanding the potential of cycling. We create and manufacture components that inspire cyclists. And we just live there. And, we are, whether it's through our advocacy to expand the potential of cycling, or World Bicycle Relief to expand the potential of cycling, or our component design that's inspiring cyclists. To us, it's just what we do, and we love it.
So you're now nearly $1 billion company, and you're spoken about in the same breath as Shimano. And you think back to those early days and that fork in the road when you filed that lawsuit against Shimano and all that brought SRAM and what it did for SRAM. Now, with such a big company now, how do you find navigating those same types of things while still protecting your IP, your competitive advantage, your place in the market?
I think you have to have a good moral compass, and I think we have had that, and I'm confident that we've instilled that in the organization, and I'm confident that Ken will maintain it, and because of the type of person he is. A funny story. You go back to, I think it was the 2005, 2006, something like that. We had a component factory for low-end components in Guangzhou. The name of the town escapes me for the moment, but anyway, it's in the Guangzhou area. And in the city that we were in of 10 million people, our factory with 150 employees, we were the largest taxpayer in the city. And the Taiwanese people that had factories in that city too couldn't believe we were paying the taxes. It was like, oh, we're paying the taxes because we have to pay the taxes. But that's some of the. I think that commitment to do what's right is how you keep a global enterprise with multiple cultures all aimed in the right direction or in the same direction. Because if you start doing shortcuts in one place or another, I think it tends to dissolve. It erodes. So, we do the right thing. We're committed to doing the right thing, and that's who we are.
Do you ever sit down either alone or with your co-founders and just reflect and kind of look at each other and say, "We've done it. We've done it. We've succeeded"? Does that ever happen? Do you ever reflect back and look at your success, or how do you view that?
Well, we certainly never imagined when we started that we would be here as we sit here today. That was not part of the plan. It's how the journey evolved, and it's been a great journey. But I don't think that we're anywhere near the end point. I think we're at the beginning of the next chapter, and I can't wait to see where we go. And what I can see right now as I look at the 3 to 5 year product plans, they're great, and they're really inspiring. And I can't wait for that vision to unfold from our product guys. But that's not where the company is going. The company's going beyond that. And that's going to be really exciting to see where this super talented pool of team members with product innovation just, running in their DNA can take the organization. I'm super excited.
You look really fit, Stan. What are you doing with your time these days? I know you're not retired. You're still chairman of the board and everything. And what's keeping you busy?
Well, I call it Plan B. So I'm on Plan B now, which is bikes, boats, books, beer, and barbecue. Plan B.
I'm Wade Wallace, and thanks for listening to another episode of Overnight Success. If you have suggestions on a remarkable entrepreneurial story within the cycling industry, hit me up on our members Discord channel where I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, stay inspired and stay tuned for our next episode.